Some of the least effective reforms introduced in my political lifetime have been those for which there appeared to be agreement between the parties and which were not subject to intense argument. Just going on, the right of all MPs to ask detailed questions of ministers and the duty on government to provide full answers can paradoxically be helpful to the ministers concerned in keeping control of their own departments, and so does scrutiny by strong parliamentary select committees. I'll give you just one example. When I went to the Foreign Office, I said I wanted a table of all the people employed by the Foreign Office, not the list of their names, but numbers, by posts in the UK and abroad, not only of UK-based staff, but of locally engaged staff. And the answer kept coming back that the office didn't have it. Then somebody put in a parliamentary question. It came to me for sign-off, and there was the answer. I raised Cain with the office for denying me the answer, but I was able to find out things about my department that I hadn't been able to find out myself, and that was from an opponent. Now, you're, all of you, infinitely better qualified than am I to make judgments about the political situation in Nigeria. But in conversation with a number of political analysts who are either working on Nigeria or who are Nigerian themselves, it's clear that too often politics, and thus the democratic system here, can become or be seen as a zero-sum game. Or as one individual told me, a situation where the winner takes all. Now, you don't need me to tell you how damaging this can be. If oppositions aren't heard, their supporters feel voiceless. If governments aren't held to account, the latter are much more likely both to make mistakes and to engender disappointment by being seen to govern in the name of their own supporters only, not for all citizens. And those who feel disenfranchised are much more likely to resort to violence. As I mentioned earlier, Nigeria, as we all know, is a young democracy with much to commend it. There are, of course, other democracies elsewhere which are struggling with similar issues to those which you face. Take Turkey as just one example, coming to terms with, again, amongst other things, the precise role that an opposition is able to play. And I'm pleased, for all the reasons I've set out for having a strong opposition, that there now appears to be a movement towards a more cohesive and effective opposition in Nigeria. And I say this in an entirely bipartisan way. With the creation of the All Progressive Congress, APC grouping, Nigerian politics can, in general, if the process is handled correctly, be enhanced. The current governing party, the PDP, can only benefit, in my judgment, from facing a stronger opposition. Most importantly, however, this new grouping can give the opposition, the current minority, a stronger voice, which will be to the benefit of all Nigerians. As former President Obasanjo commented last year, a stronger opposition is, quote, good for the country. Alongside strengthening the role of the opposition, there are other reforms which can bolster democracy. Take transparency and accountability. For voters to trust in their political system, it's important that their elected representatives are accountable and that the political system is transparent. It's an obvious truth that if people feel that a political figure or governing party is not accountable, then they won't engage with the political process. From this develops widespread malaise or a general mistrust. Those who are guilty of wrongdoing, corruption, for example, must be held to account, whilst the government more generally must be accountable to the people. In addition to the major reforms of election law and party financing, I was also responsible as Home Secretary for introducing two other major important pieces of legislation, the Human Rights Act and the Freedom of Information Act. The first act incorporated key articles of the European Convention of Human Rights into UK law. These articles set out basic rights in terms which are familiar across the world and can be found in your Chapter 4 of your own Constitution. They provide the individual, however objectionable their own conduct may be, with fundamental rights of a fair trial, no torture, no arbitrary arrest or detention, of family life, privacy, freedom of speech and religion. For the first time in the United Kingdom, each of these articles gave a right of action in the British courts to the individual against the state. The Second Act gave a right for individuals to obtain information held by public authorities with fewer exemptions than many in government have found comfortable. Both of these acts gained support inside my party during those frustrating 18 years of opposition. And as with the reforms of election law and party funding, in government, when we went into government and passed them, they didn't seem to be quite such a good idea. Many are the occasions when another minister would seek me out in the lobbies of the Commons to tell me that, thanks to your damned acts, Jack, that minister was now being embarrassed by a court action or an order to release information they would otherwise rather have kept quiet about. But although these acts may need some improvement in their detailed provisions, these acts are here to stay. They have exposed wrongdoing by the elites, including by members of Parliament themselves. In 2009, following a court order which itself had been strongly contested by the House of Commons, details emerged which showed that some members of Parliament had been making fraudulent claims for expenses. 5 British MPs went to jail in consequence. The scandal badly damaged confidence in politics, and we still feel its reverberations. As Justice Secretary, I had to introduce legislation to place the setting of MP salaries, of pensions, and expenses on an entirely independent basis. No longer could the House of Commons set its own regime for expenses, salaries, and pensions. Doing that didn't make me popular either, but the legislation was, however, absolutely necessary. Alongside these regulations, there are strict rules laid down by the Commons itself to prevent conflicts of interest. Paid advocacy is banned. Every penny which an MP may legitimately earn from an outside source has to be disclosed on a public register. Now, the United Kingdom has come a long way from the systemic corruption of the 18th and major part of the 19th centuries. Very tough rules on the expenditure of public money, including the letting of contracts, make it extremely difficult and very risky to siphon public money for private use. We did, however, face a situation where our laws relating to bribery and corruption of foreign officials were not strong enough and were the source of criticism by the OECD. So another act, which I introduced as Justice Minister, was the 2010 Corruption Act. This makes it a criminal offence in the United Kingdom for any UK citizen or company to be involved in bribery or corruption anywhere abroad. And there's corporate liability too. That act was passed with all party support, but after years of discussion. It led initially to some business people saying that they felt it placed them at a disadvantage when bidding for work abroad. But many now welcome it. It cut short all conversation on bribery, one businessman told me, when I point out that I could go to jail and my company be heavily penalised if I get embroiled in any shady business. In the widely accepted corruption index of Transparency International, the UK is today placed 14th out of 177 countries. In contrast, Nigeria languishes in 144th place. And it's not a good tale. The blunt truth is that widespread corruption and well-functioning democratic systems are wholly incompatible. Corruption is another way in which elites maintain their power and disproportionate wealth and cheat the majority out of what is rightly theirs. It's by no means the only reason, but it is certainly one reason why Nigeria is not matching the potential which it so evidently has. Your Excellency, Mr. Governor, rights, freedoms and responsibilities underpinned by a functioning democratic system are all noble ideals. The challenge is to ensure that they are delivered fairly so that each citizen can enjoy the full fruits of nationhood and citizenship. To recall the famous words of Franklin Roosevelt, let us never forget that government is ourselves, not an alien power over us. The ultimate rulers of our democracy are not a president and senators and congressmen and government officials, but voters of this country. Thank you very much indeed.